Another new feature with this release is automatic case creation rules. This feature allows you to reduce the need for manually creating cases from incoming email. The conditions in these rules automatically convert the email messages to cases if the specified conditions are met. The automatic case creation rules do not simply create a generic case for every email. Several options are available that allow you to control when a new case should be created. You also have the ability to populate field values conditionally and automatically send a response to the customer. These rules can also be used in combination with the new routing rules feature to automatically route the case to a different queue based on criteria of the case. Let's take a look at how you can create a new automatic case creation rule. There's two different paths you could choose. Both of them are available from underneath Service Management. One way you could do this is going into Automatic Case Creation Rules and clicking New to start from scratch there. Another option that we'll take a look at though is within the queues area. If I choose queues, I see my list of queues. The one I'm going to choose is Level 1 Support, which has an email address of support@contoso.com. So the scenario would be that a customer sends an email to that email address, and I want to have it automatically create a case based off of certain conditions, instead of having to have someone manually create the case based off that incoming email. So I'll open up that queue. So on the queues form here, on the command bar, you'll see that there's two different commands available: email to case settings and social to case settings. Both of these will create a new automatic case creation rule and will set the channel appropriately. So in our demonstration, we're going to be focusing on the email to case scenario, but be aware that there is another option available where if you're choosing to have an integration with a social listening application that maybe creates social activities inside of CRM based off of posts from social networks such as Twitter or Facebook, you could have those social activities automatically create cases as well, similar to what we can do with the email to case scenario. So here we're going to choose email to case. So you can see that some of the fields here were automatically populated. One of the fields that was populated automatically was the queue, and that's because I started from the queue when I clicked that option. If I would have went to the automatic case creation rules section to create the rule from scratch, I would have manually selected the queue. Also, because I chose the command for email to case, it automatically set the source type to email. If I would have chose the social option, it would have chose social monitoring for me automatically. So I need to provide a name. Before we look at each of the available options here, one other thing I want to mention is that here we have Level 1 Support selected as the queue and email as the source type. You can only have one automatic case creation rule per queue per source type. So once I've saved this one, I would not be able to create another automatic case creation rule for email for this queue. I could create another one for social monitoring, but I couldn't have more than one per source type for that same queue. So let's take a look at each of the options that are available. So there are multiple options you can use to control whether or not it automatically creates that as a case. The first one is create cases for emails from unknown senders. And by default, this one is not selected. So with it not selected, what would happen is that if the email is not resolved to either an account or contact in CRM, it would not automatically create that as a case. It would still stay in the queue for someone to look at, but it wouldn't automatically create that as a case. If you check this option, it will automatically create the case, and if a contact doesn't exist, it'll create one. The next option that's available is whether or not to create a case if a valid entitlement exists for the customer. So by default, this is not selected, so it means it's always going to create a case regardless of whether or not there is an entitlement associated with that customer. If you have this selected, it means it's only going to create that as a case if there is a valid entitlement. So if that email comes and resolves to an account, it'll check to see, does that account have an entitlement that's valid? If so, it would create that case. If there wasn't an entitlement, it would not create that case. If this was coming from a contact, it would check to see if that contact had an entitlement, or if it was a child of an account that had an entitlement. If it did match with an account that had an entitlement, it would check to see if that entitlement has a filter based off of the contacts that are authorized to create a case. In that case, if that entitlement did restrict based off of contacts, it would check to make sure that this contact that sent that is one of those authorized contacts. If it's not, it wouldn't create the case. The next option that's available is whether or not the email will create a case if it's associated with a resolved case. If it's associated with an active case, it wouldn't create a new case, it would just associate that new email to the existing open case. if it's associated with a resolved case, it's going to decide whether or not to create a case based off of whether this is selected. So if this is not selected, it would not create a new case. It would just associate it again with that resolved case. It would still be in the queue for someone to see. If you choose this option, it would create a brand new case even though there was an existing resolved case. So you'll see that by selecting this checkbox, a new option appeared. What this option allows you to do is to control whether or not, based off of the duration of how long that case has been resolved, whether it should create a brand new case. So for example, if I switch this to a duration of, I'll choose 3 days, and then I'll type a 0 after this. So I have 30 days, and basically how this would work then is that your company might have a policy that a customer is able to contact again within a certain duration, such as 30 days, and reopen that existing case. But if it's been longer than 30 days, you might want to create a brand new case to track that as a new issue. So in this case, by having this set to 30 days, if an email comes into a case that's been resolved for 35 days, it would automatically create a new case. If that email was associated to a case that was resolved for only 10 days, it would just associate that email to the existing resolved case. The bottom option available here is whether or not you want to send an automatic response based off the creation of that case. By default, it's not selected, but if I select this, I'll see an option to choose an email template. So I could choose from any of my different email templates I have and use that as the automatic response. The next section requires me to save the record before I can start working with it. That's the Specify Case Details section. So the Specify Case Details section is optional. I wouldn't have to create any records. I could actually activate this right now, and it would begin creating cases based off of the conditions specified here. One thing to be aware of is that when you're creating these cases automatically, it'll automatically populate the title based off the subject of the email, and it'll populate the customer field on the case based off of who sent that email. So it basically populates those two fields automatically. It does not populate the description of the case with the body of the email, which might have a bunch of HTML in it. Also, then what this functionality allows me to do is specify how I want to populate some of the other fields on the case potentially. And I can create multiple different conditions, and then based off of if it meets that condition, I want to have it populate a certain field. So let's get started by creating a new case details record. So I'm just going to click the plus button on this subgrid. I need to provide a name. So the next thing I'm going to do is define the condition. Here I can choose to do this conditionally based off of one of the fields from the email or any of the relationships from that email. For example, I can choose sender account. So if the sender of that email resolves to an account, I could do it based off a condition of that specific account that was found. So here I'm going to choose category. So I'm basically going to look to see if this is a preferred customer, then maybe I want to do a certain condition. And I could add additional conditions here. So instead, maybe if it doesn't resolve to an account, maybe it resolves to a contact. I could have some other condition here. This is just one I'm going to use as an example, but you could use any other condition you can think of. And I don't want both these conditions to be met, I just want one or the other. So I'll group them as an OR condition group. So now that I've defined that condition, I need to specify which case properties I want to populate if that condition is met. So for this example, I'm simply going to set the priority equal to high. So I could just stop with this one condition and save this, but for demonstration purposes, I'm going to create one additional item. So you could have multiple rule items like this. For this example, I'm simply going to use this second one as a fallback. I'm going to call this default. And here again, I could specify a condition, but I'm really going to use this as my fallback so that if the first condition isn't met, if it meets any other conditions, I just want to set the priority to normal. So for those reasons, I'm not going to specify any conditions here. I'm just going to choose to set priority is equal to normal. I'm going to click Save and Close. So now you can see that both these case detail items appears in the list here. And this works similar to some of the other features that were introduced with this release, where you're able to control the order, and the order does matter. It's basically going to evaluate these in the order that they're listed here. So first it would look at this first condition I defined, which would check to see if the account is a preferred customer or the contact had a credit limit over $10,000. If it met either of those conditions, it would set the priority to high. If it didn't meet one of those conditions, it would fall back to evaluating this one. And inside of this one, I didn't define any conditions, so this one should always get applied as a fallback. In that case, it would set the priority to normal. So I do have these up and down arrows, so if I did switch these to have this different order, this wouldn't actually work the way I'd want it to because I didn't have a condition defined in here, so it would always apply this one, and it would never fall back to setting the priority to high. So the order does matter, and once you're ready, you can choose to activate this, so it starts applying to any new email messages that come into that queue.